Welcome to Scandinavian Boa. My name is Stefan and today we're going to talk about boa care. First off, I think it's important to point out that it's a long-term commitment getting a boa. You see the small little super cute noodle and they grow. And they grow quite fast. This one is a 2020 girl. She's about 3.5 years old and she's about 5 feet or 1.5 meters. Normally the males gets to be around 5 to 7 feet long and the females grows to somewhere between 6 to 8 feet normally. Of course there are abnormalities that gets larger. We can see the 10 plus feet females and for sure we can see the 8-9 feet males, but normally that's about the size they get. So what do you need to proper care for one of these then? Both in terms of enclosures, heat, lighting, substrate, feeding, and so on. So then we start first with enclosure size. Normally for babies I use racks. This one is about 20 by 9 by 3 inches or 53 centimeters by 23 centimeters by 9 centimeters, I believe. Perfect for babies. When we get over to the adults, I prefer to have them in cages and not in racks, because, like, have a look at the natural environment the boas live in. They come from a tropical climate with rainforest, they have a lot of space to move around. A lot of people say that big boas don't move around so much, that they don't climb. I would actually beg to differ. If you give them the opportunity to do it, they will. I have climbing possibilities in all my bigger cages, and even the larger females that are 8-9 plus feet are climbing. So I usually want to keep them in the rack system until they are about 6 months, maybe a little bit older, and then I usually want to move them over to enclosure like this one. This one is about 3 by 2 by 2 or 1 meter by 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters if we're talking the European metric system. In those enclosures, I usually keep them until they are somewhere between 12 and 18 months, and then I usually move them up to something that is about 4 by 2 by 2, and there I usually keep them until they are about 2.5, 3 years. Next step up is 5 by 2 by 2. This one is actually 5 by 3 by 2, I believe. Perfect for the sub-adult females, but also lifelong cages for most of the males. For the adult females, I usually have cages that are 7 by 3 by 3 or 2 meters by just under 1 meter by just under 1 meter. We also have a couple of cages that are double the size, that are 7 by 6 by 3 feet. So how big enclosures do you actually need? Depending on where you live, you have to read up on the rules and regulations. In Sweden, we have a regulation that says how big the cages has to be. We're not allowed to go any smaller. I know in the US you usually have smaller cages, but I think you at least should consider that for every feet of the snake, you should have 1 square feet in the enclosure. So if you have a 5 feet snake, you should at least have a 3 by 2. I would suggest 4 by 2, but that's up to you. I would definitely say the bigger the better. They will use the space that is provided for them, but to consider the bigger the cage or the enclosure, the harder it can be to get the proper heat in the cage. Now while we're talking heat, we're going to talk temperatures. You should provide a gradient temperature from around 80 to 90 degrees or 27 to 32 degrees Celsius if you're in Europe. You should also provide a basking spot or like an undertank belly heater that is somewhere around 90 to 95 degrees or 32 to 35 degrees Celsius. It's very unusual that the boas use the basking spot except for gravid females or if they are digesting food, but you should always provide it. Nighttime drops is okay, but you should maintain a temperature of somewhere around 78 to 85 degrees. If it happens to fall down to 75, it's no big worries. A bit colder is always better than too hot. Boas are very resilient and tough creatures, and they can handle colder temperatures. The only thing you really need to consider and why it's important that you have a thermostat and you're monitoring the temps in the enclosure regularly, because too hot can give neurological issues. So maybe up to 100 or 37 degrees Celsius is okay for short amount of times, but for longer periods or higher temps you can get real problems with the snake and they can actually end up dying from it. If we talk breeding, the temperatures are a little bit different, and that's not what we're going to talk about in this video. If you want to have a breeding video, just throw one comment down below and maybe we'll make it happen. As mentioned previously, these are tropical animals and they require humidity, both to be able to shed well, but also to stay hydrated and don't get respiratory infections and stuff like that. The level should be somewhere around 60 to 70% over time. Shorter spikes right after misting up to 80-90% is no worse at all, because it will go down. But I also think that you should allow the substrate you use to dry out and let the humidity go down to around 50% from time to time to avoid molding in the substrate. Misting the enclosures or not and how often you need to do that is very dependent on where you live. Like if you live in Florida, you have humidity somewhere around 70%, then you don't have to mist. I know some Florida people that just shakes their head when they hear people about misting their boa enclosures. Like for myself here in Sweden, during the summer, I normally just has to mist the enclosures about once a week, but now during winter time when it's a lot drier, I have to mist them every second or third day. For substrate, there are a lot of different possibilities. Some people want to use paper. I use that for the babies because it's easier to track their poop and their shedding cycle to see that they are healthy and doing everything as they are supposed to do. In our enclosures, we use a bioactive setup. If you want to learn more about how we set up our enclosures, we have a video about it and I will leave a link to it up here. Something that I think is both quite cheap and good is cocoa husk, because it holds humidity very well. It's very easy to spot clean because you see the poop and everything. It's quite easy. As I mentioned, it's quite cheap, comes in blocks, you soak it in water and it expands and it holds humidity real well. You can also use soil and stuff like that to consider if you're buying it from Home Depot and not from a reptile shop. Make sure to check that you have no pesticides or fertilizers in it, because that's not good for the animals. So now we're going to talk about lighting. I think it's important that you give the animals a day and a night cycle. I have in all my enclosures, I have a heat bulb, I have a regular LED or just incandescent bulb, and also UVB. If you choose to keep them in a rack system, then it's very difficult to mount some kind of lighting in the rack system. So then I think it's important that you light the room, or if you have windows that give the daylight possibilities could come in, just so the animals get the day and night cycle. Something that is important to consider with windows in a reptile room is how the sun shines through it and if it's hitting any enclosures, because then you can get a problem with the heat rising in the enclosures on hot days when the sunbeams hits the enclosures. So that's something to consider. As mentioned, I have UVB. I'm no specialist. I have people that help me with what strength it should be. There are studies that UVB are good for reptiles, but I know a lot of people that keep their boas without UVB, just have LED lights, and they are perfectly fine. Now it's time to look what else we put in the enclosures. Absolute minimum is a water dish and a hide. If you have bigger enclosures, I think you should provide some opportunities for the animal to climb. We use logs and I have a couple of shelves usually. In the smaller enclosure it's just some logs and some cork layers so they can climb and lay around. And like I said previously, I actually think that the boas enjoy it, because even our bigger female 8-9 plus feet are climbing and using all the different levels in the enclosures. So now you have everything set up, the animal have moved in, how to do and take proper care of the animal then. First off, water. I normally change the water about twice a week. I usually refills the water if they have been drinking, so we get a little bit more fresh water in it. You should check on your boas on a daily basis and spot clean if you see if they have pooped or pee somewhere. And if you're not doing a bioactive setup, I would suggest doing a deep clean and maybe changing most of the substrate every month. With the bioactive setup, you don't have to do it. We have the little cleanup crew. These small little fellows, the isopods and the springtails. So if you would happen to miss something, they will clean it up and they will give fertilizer to the plants in the enclosures. So, last but not least, feeding. I think you should look at the girth rate of the snake and choose the prey item. It shouldn't leave a big lump, especially not on the younger ones. I'm not going to go in depth how I feed my animals. If you want that, we can do a feeding video later on. But normally, on the younger ones, I feed once a week. When they get a little bit older, once every second week. And for the adults, somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks between feeding, depending on what size of prey they are getting. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comment. I promise I will answer them. And for now, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. And till next time, bye!